Um, Hello everyone. Welcome to another NAMA webinar. I am Trent Blizzard, the president of NAMA, and I am here with our presenter tonight, Aaron Hilliard. Say hi, Aaron.
Hi, Aaron. No, I'm
Oh,
just
perfect. And Aaron's going to talk to us about the history of mycology and taxonomy, the mushrooms we love, and the people who care about them. And this is coming to us kind of hot off the press. He's done this, I think, a few times recently. I was at a event in Oregon in very early November, and he presented there. It was very popular. I'm excited you're doing this for us today, Aaron. Thank you.
yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.
Yeah. Now, I'm just going to say a few quick words about you. Aaron's an amateur mycologist out of Port Orchard, Washington, and I think you're on the very involved and maybe on the board of trustees of the Kitsap Peninsula
Vice president
Mycological.
for a number of years. And now I just kind of help do social media stuff and work on the annual show. But yeah, very involved with KPMS.
Okay, well, awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And he's really probably best well known for Mushroom Wonderland, his online presence. I know it's a YouTube channel and more. If you have not caught Aaron's YouTube videos or his short Facebook posts, they are hilarious and beloved, and they always delight us. I'm not so much on the socials, but Kristen is, and she always shows me your stuff when you post it. So.
Yeah. I try to keep it up to date, keep new stuff coming all the time.
You do. I'm gonna sign off here though. If you want to pop up your presentation, I'm gonna sign off. I'll pop back in here later occasionally and feed a few questions people put in the Q&A area. But otherwise, why don't you take it away for us?
All right. Well, I'm gonna start out with my intro that you may or may not be familiar with, but here's
Welcome to Mushroom Wonderland.
all right. That's kind of my introduction. If you're not familiar with Mushroom Wonderland, it's a YouTube channel I started almost 6 years ago now. I'm here in the Pacific Northwest, and as Trent mentioned, I was vice president of the Kitsap Peninsula Mycological Society for a number of years. Still very involved there. I teach some intro mycology classes at Olympic College in Bremerton, Washington. I do private forays, and I make these YouTube videos, and I'm on all the social media. So I have like comedy, mushroom comedy on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, things like that. And then I do long form content on Mushroom Wonderland, where I do like travel vlog stuff, foraging, mushroom identification. Just got back from Hawaii with a bunch of PhD mycologists and just great amateurs and stuff. And we were documenting fungal diversity in Kauai. So a lot of videos coming out about that, which is cool. So I'm pretty involved in the mushroom scene, been obsessed with mushrooms since I was a kid, and my grandma got me into them. And I've always appreciated history. And one day, a bunch of old literature was getting tossed out. Didn't have room for storage at the Mushroom Club, and I intercepted some of this stuff on the way to the dumpster. And in it was a class outline from Dr. Daniel Stuntz, the mycology professor at the University of Washington, from 1973-74, and part of that class outline was mycological history. So I took that and I adapted it into this presentation. I've elaborated on some of the things that he said. I've added a lot of stuff and made it quite entertaining. But I was just fascinated with mushrooms, and I think history is really interesting. So I thought, what a cool combination. To kind of go back and see where love for mushrooms started, the people who really cared about them, and beyond. So that's the premise of this talk. And at some point, I had to leave a lot of people out of this talk because there's just so many people in the mycological community that have contributed over the years. So I really tried to stick to Dr. Stunt's outline, even though I added like females and people of color and stuff like that in that are more relevant than maybe what he had in there, but he doesn't even make it into this presentation. Maybe in the future he could be added in there, but I had to draw the line somewhere, because if I start talking about people who are still alive, then I'm going to definitely be leaving a lot of people out. So we're going to just jump into this and start talking about mycological history and the mushrooms we love. So here we go. Let's see. Oh. All right, early humans and mushrooms. So early humans discovered wild mushrooms as a food source through trial and error, obviously. Knowledge of the environment and mushroom types were just passed down through the generations. They were likely so commonly used that people didn't take much record of them. There's not a lot of fossil evidence of fungi, and people probably use them so commonly that it was kind of like drawing broccoli on a cave wall. It was like just everyday stuff. So people didn't really, go to too much trouble. Although there are some cave paintings and stuff of mushrooms. There's one theory that's known as the stoned ape hypothesis that suggests that maybe psychedelic mushrooms influenced human cognitive evolution. And last summer at Telluride, Dennis McKenna revisited that hypothesis as a keynote speaker there. And it's pretty interesting, kind of talking about how roaming tribes of people would follow cattle through the subtropical regions, and inevitably they had to have eaten these mushrooms growing on the cow patties, and it kind of melted some gateways in their minds and helped them to communicate better, which advanced human evolution. And that's really the elevator pitch of the stoned ape hypothesis, or theory, if you will. But it's pretty interesting. Excuse me. So the earliest evidence of mushroom use, recent radiocarbon dating techniques discovered the spores of bolete and agaric mushrooms from the tooth plaque of an almost 19,000-year-old woman found at the El Miran cave in Cantabria, Spain. And so she's known as the Red Lady because they put iron oxide pigment on her bones. So there was a skeleton, they looked at the tooth plaque, and they could find spores and differentiate the boletoid from the agaricoid spores, proving that she had been eating a variety of mushrooms almost 19,000 years ago, which I think is pretty cool. This guy is pretty famous. This guy on the left, a 5,300-year-old mummy known as Otzi the Iceman. And Otzi had a couple of mushrooms on his person when he was discovered. He was found in the mountains between Italy and Austria, and he was carrying a satchel. And on the strap of his satchel, he had what's known as Fomitopsis betulina, or the birch polypore. And it was likely to treat intestinal parasites, or he may have used it as a styptic for wounds. So you can slice this mushroom into slabs, and if you have an open wound, you can wrap it onto that, and it works as an antibacterial, antiviral. And if you look next to that picture, here's a pretty recent observation. This photo was provided by this Pietro Scarpa guy on iNaturalist just last September. So this is probably exactly what the mushroom looked like that Otzi had picked. And then inside the satchel, it also contained the tinder conch, so Fomes fomentarius, which he may have used to preserve an ember of fire, the equivalent to a modern day Bic lighter. So that he would take a coal and stuff it into the middle of this conch and then carry it with him. His skeleton showed serious signs of wear and tear on his knees and his low back, suggesting that he hiked a lot in the mountains. And so my theory is that he was just a mushroom hunter who lost his way. But there's a picture of his mummified body, and interestingly, in his stomach, they found a fungi called Pseudogymnoascus destructans, which is also what the bats in North America have been suffering from. Some bat populations have been decimated by like up to 90% because of this fungus, and it starts to grow on their nose. It wakes them out of their hibernation, and then they go out looking for food, which they can't find, and then they die. So they don't die as a direct result of that fungus, but it creates a chain reaction that's really bad. But I just read a paper the other day that they're showing a comeback, that it seems to be going away. So that's great news. But interesting that they also found it in the belly of Otzi the Iceman. Let's see. Okay, so up to the 16th century, scientific knowledge of fungi scarcely advanced beyond what was known about them by the Greeks and the Romans, namely how to recognize a few edible and a few poisonous mushrooms, but really nothing about their structure or biology. So this lady's saying all mushrooms are edible once, he, and he's saying, shut it. That's not what edible means. Let's stop saying that. I don't know if they actually had that conversation, but they should have. Okay, European taxonomy and mycology. So it was this region of the world where historic record and attempts to classify and organize fungi started. They're not the first people that knew about mushrooms. Chinese have known about mushrooms for a long, long, long time, but it seemed like taxonomy, there's just something about the European brain that really wanted to classify everything, put it into groups and understand its phylogeny or its ancestry better. So, this area in Western Europe was kind of where all of the taxonomy started. So taxonomy's purpose is to help determine the ancestry of an organism for communicating to one another and to become familiar with the benefits or the dangers of fungal organisms. So taxonomy of fungi is constantly changing, and it makes it a little bit confusing. And so new understanding of these organisms through DNA testing is causing a lot of changes, and it has been that way for about 20 years. Up until then, things seemed pretty settled, but it's crazy right now. And so it's a growing science, and you can help contribute to science by uploading your fungal discoveries on iNaturalist.org. So it's highly suggested by me that everybody download the iNaturalist app. And when you go out mushroom hunting, to take really nice, clear photos of the mushrooms that you're finding and uploading them so that other people in the world can know what's growing there. We can start to create these charts and graphs of the regularity of fungi. And then in looking at that, we can start to see if like conservation needs to take place or anything like that. So it's just a super helpful tool, one of the great things that the internet's capable of. So it was just disorganization and confusion up to that point. Until the late 1700s, there was no unified way of classifying mushrooms. Everyone was giving the same thing different names, making it almost impossible to communicate in a scientific sense with each other. A lot of great botanists of the time were naming mushrooms, but they were naming them all these different things. They didn't have the internet, they didn't have phones, so it was tough to communicate with one another. So back then, plant and mushroom names would be known by long, confusing sets of Latin and Greek words, often regionally different from each other. And then some people started to care about mushrooms. And this guy's saying, you're spreading misinformation. And he's saying, no, you are. And that argument still rages today. So here's this book contains the first published illustration of a fungus ever. In 1491, this book called the Hortus Sanitatis, or the Garden of Health, was published, put together by a guy named Jacob Maidenbach. Super interesting book. If you have a chance to look this up on the internet, check out the Hortus Sanitatis. Sometimes the H is on Hortus, sometimes it's just Ortus, but it also contained what he thought he was trying to classify all the organisms on Earth, and it contains mermaids and dragons and unicorns. And so he heard hearsay from other parts of the world about these things. So he wrote his best description for mermaids, dragons, unicorns, mandrake root, and also the first ever picture published of some mushrooms. And he didn't say a lot about them, but you can see the picture on that page there of the mushrooms depicted. So after talking to a lot of professionals and experts, I think that this is probably Marasmius oreades, so the fairy ring mushroom. And you can see the striations on the cap. And then here's a real picture of them. This one was observed in Mainz, Germany, right where the book was written. So this is probably the mushroom he was looking at. This picture was taken and put on iNaturalist in September of 2022. So I imagine this must be Marasmius oreades, which is an interesting mushroom known as the fairy ring mushroom. So oreades refers to mountain nymphs. The species epithet there means mountain nymphs or fairies. So it literally means the fairy mushroom. There's so much folklore surrounding the fairy ring. Some people think that they're created by fairies that were dancing in the night. In Germany, they thought that's where witches had performed some spells. In Romania, they thought that's where a dragon had landed and blown fire. And there's so many other, just regionally specific folklore around fairy rings. Some people think it's good luck to step in one. Some people think it's bad luck to step in one. So I think they're cool. It's really just it's a mycelial organism that's growing outward and then fruiting on the outer edge of its mycelium. So yeah, Tammy in the chat says something about like the ring in Kauai. Yeah, at our camp in Kauai, there was a beautiful fairy ring of Lepista tarda growing right out there in the grass. So it was really neat. I saw a lot of people step in it, so I'd like to touch bases, see how their luck is going. But they're also a good edible. They taste a little bit like Parmesan cheese. And here is a picture of some of them dried, sold in France, and they sell them for a lot of money there. So don't pass up the fairy ring mushrooms, but be careful. They can, bioaccumulate metals and stuff out of the lawn that they're growing in. Let's see. All right. In 1640, this guy, John Parkinson from England, he wrote Theatrum Botanicum, or the Theater of Plants. And keep in mind, there were nobody were called mycologists at that time. These were botanists, and some of them took an interest in fungi. So he wrote quite a bit about mushrooms. And here's some of the stuff that he said. He's the first person to really give any attention to fungi in literature. And he said, "But I know the Hungarians, Germans, and others gather them, of those that grow in the woods, under fir trees, under oaks, to pick and to dry them as one pleases. Some boil and drain and press the water out of them, and then slice and put oil and vinegar on them, a little salt, or as others please, sugar and some spice, and eat them cold. Others put butter and sugar and spice and eat them hot, or boil them with milk or cream or fat broth. Others slice them and throw fine flour on them, and then fry them with butter, fat, or oil." So that's kind of cool. People were frying up crispy mushrooms back then, which is pretty awesome. And what he had to say was, people are eating them cold with sugar on them. WTF? Yeah, that's weird. But here's a picture from that book. And this one he called Fungus muscarius. And you might recognize this one as the Amanita muscaria, or Mario mushroom, the red mushroom with the white spots. Kind of an interesting picture. And it's curious to look at some of these other drawings. Some of them look really spot on, but there's little subtle differences. So it makes you think, were the mushrooms just a little bit different 400 years ago? But I doubt it. So he also said that these are said to kill as many flies as will fit on them, as well as when they are dry or fresh, some of them being greater and broader than others, and some much redder with white spots. All of them grow in the woods. So he made the connection to an insecticide, and that's what they were known for a long time. So in 1727, this guy came along, Sebastian Vaillant, a huge name in mycology. So he was a doctor and a surgeon with a deep interest in fungi, plants, and the natural world in general. He became too old and poor to publish his 36-year work, and it was published 5 years after he died. So he was a botanist to the King of France, and he worked in the royal garden of the King of France in Versailles. He coined the botany term stamen, ovary, and egg. So a pretty big game player in botany. And he created something called the Botanicon Paracense, or the plants of France, in which fungi were so carefully observed and well illustrated that many of them can be recognized today. So let's take a look at some of his drawings. I decided to go ahead and draw the mushrooms realistically. He's like the first person that ever really cared to do that. So here is the plants of France, and you can see in the middle picture, different canthorellus. So it looks like definitely a chanterelle, maybe a marasmius in the middle there, but on top it looks kind of like craterellus, what we know is a winter chanterelle. Really beautiful. I really like this picture on the bottom because it shows all the way from a baby to the one on the far right is really kind of desiccated. This is an old mushroom that, and it's valuable to know all of the phases of a mushroom's life, because sometimes you'll only come upon a collection that's like number 24 in that lineup or whatever. and so it's important to know that. So that was cool that he did that. And then if you look here in the top right corner is this very mechanical looking mushroom coming out of this volvate sac with a partial veil, and this one could be recognized as the death cap. And so he was the first one to describe the death cap in 1727. He called it Fungus phalloides annulatus sortidae virescens patulus. So yeah, talk about a mouthful. If you thought mushroom names now are hard to pronounce, you would have really been struggling back there. But fungus phalloides refers to the mushroom shaped like a phallus. And if you don't know what a phallus is, look that up really quick. Annulatus refers to the annulus, so that's that partial veil or the skirt hanging on the stipe. Sortidae virescens means dirty greenish, which is pretty accurate, and patulus meaning a flat cap with age. And here is a picture taken from my naturalist from Zorilli of a death cap that was observed last August in Meudon, France, which is right near where Vaillant did his work. So this is probably what the mushroom looked like that he was describing, which is kind of cool. Probably the most, not probably, but it's definitely the most deadly mushroom on accounts of people dying from eating poisonous mushrooms. And that's a whole talk in itself. There's a big outbreak right now in California, and news stations are warning against foraging all mushrooms because of it. I think you just need to know which mushrooms you're picking and you're going to be fine. But then this guy came along, 1729, Pierre A. Mycilvaine. He is considered the founder of mycology. He was an Italian botanist and a Catholic priest, and he devised the first logical classification of fungi. He was the first to examine them with a crude microscope about equal to the power of a modern hand lens. So, the hand lens that a lot of us carry around, that's about what he was using. But he was the first to demonstrate that fungal spores, which in those days they called seminal dust, were fungi's means of sexual reproduction. So up until then, they didn't even know how fungi reproduced, but this guy was saying, I have found fungi's naughty parts. Oh, I hope you're all laughing out there. I am. I laugh every time that part comes up. So Mycilvaine discovered that spores put on a melon would germinate and grow. And so prior to that, people thought fungi were born of something called spontaneous generation. And they just thought that mushrooms just popped out of nowhere. So he also described a couple of mushrooms here that are pretty well known. Aspergillus is a mold that can infect humans. So kind of a dangerous one. There's something called an aspergilloma removal, which this fungi can actually grow a big ball of mycelial material in your lung, and you have to go get it surgically removed, which is pretty gnarly. So you don't want that to happen. And then botrytis is a gray mold, and you can see this on strawberries at the grocery store, grapes, and sometimes they use it deliberately on wine grapes to make them sweeter. Looks like Julie has some info on those. Looks like I'm better at multitasking than I thought. Anyways, so Mycilvaine died in 1736 in Florence, Italy, from pleurisy that he contracted on a collecting expedition. So Carl Linnaeus, who we'll talk about in a minute, he named a plant genus for Mycilvaine in the magnolia family. So these beautiful magnolia flowers are named after Mycilvaine, and he was buried in a doctoral gown, although he never received a degree. He was a pioneer of citizen science. This guy was an amateur, and mycology is so cool. It's one of the sciences that being an amateur isn't a slight. It's not a bad thing to be an amateur. A lot of the best contributions to mycology have come from people who don't have a degree in mycology or biology. And this is a statue of him that is in Versailles, France, that you can see. So in 1757, Carl Linnaeus, he is considered the father of modern taxonomy. He founded the binomial system of scientific names in 1758, where the name consists of two words, the genus and the species. So he was a Swedish naturalist and an explorer. He was getting interested in plants and stuff when he was just a little kid. Weird fact, he didn't even have a last name. Back in those days, he would have been called like Carl, son of Greg or whatever. And I guess his dad wanted to go to a university and he needed a last name to do that. So he named himself after the linden tree. So Linnaeus comes from linden tree, and that's where Carl Linnaeus got his name. But he categorized fungi as cryptogamia, which translates into hidden sexual organs. He categorized them based, as far as he could tell, fungi didn't have any sexual organs. He couldn't figure that part out. So he described many fungi, but put most gill mushrooms in a broad genus that he called agaricus. And that still exists today. He defined the genus Boletus, which all sponge pore mushrooms fell into, and have since been split into several different genera. And here are some of the mushrooms that he named and described that you may recognize. And just to address the chat, Mycology was named for one of the genus in the Magnolia family, not magnolias themselves. So Carl Linnaeus described Amanita muscaria as Agaricus muscarius in 1753. So musca means fly in Latin, and it was powdered and then added to milk as an insecticide, hence the common name, the fly agaric. Some other people thought that the term fly refers not to insects, but rather the delirium resulting from the consumption of the fungus. So it does contain intoxicants. It has been used as a psychoactive for millennia, but spoiler alert, it's not a hallucinogenic. It's more of a deliriant dissociative. But right here is an observation from right there near where Carl Linnaeus grew up in Sweden of Amanita muscaria. So that's probably the one he's looking at. We have European Amanita muscaria all the way over here in Western Washington. And we also have a different American variety, but were gilled mushrooms originally placed in genus Agaricus? Yes. Yes, they were. So he knew of the intoxicating effects of Amanita muscaria. He compiled a list of inebriating plants in 1762. That's the cover for that. He doesn't mention the mushroom in that list, but it is fascinating. He talks about tobacco and cannabis and opiates and all kinds of other things. And so he was aware of the intoxicating effects of the Amanita muscaria. And he was also aware of the shamanic and sometimes the maddening effects of this mushroom. He also described what we call Lactarius deliciosus, or the deliciosi group, in 1753 as Agaricus deliciosus. And the name literally means delicious. It's been eaten all over the world for a long time. Surprisingly, Linnaeus did not eat mushrooms, and he held them in high contempt and suspicion. He was quoted as saying, "The Swedish do not eat mushrooms, only foreigners do." And so he was one of the OG mycophobes who contributed to fear of mushrooms in Europe. And these sentiments still echo in the Western world today. And so this picture in the top right corner is my local Lactarius rubrolacteus, one of our deliciosus group. And then down here on the bottom right is one from right in his area of Sweden that was observed last November. So just a couple months ago, that's probably the one that he was looking at. He also described the Hydnum repandum, hedgehog mushroom, in 1753. And the word hydnum is derived from a Greek term for truffle. So interesting that he's naming things after these known delicious things, but he wasn't interested in eating any of them. But over here on the left is me holding some of our Washington hydnum. And here on the right is one that was found recently, just last month, right from where Carl Linnaeus was growing up. So that's probably what it looked like. They look pretty much the same here on the West Coast, but we have a hard time putting a species name on them. I guess we do have repandum here, but there's about 6 or 7 other species that are just they overlap morphologically so much that even the best experts just call them hydnum species because sometimes sequence data will come back from one that you think you're sure that it's morphologically organensis, and it comes back as something else. So we just call them hedgehog mushrooms here. He also described Agaricus campestris, or the meadow mushroom, in 1753. This one's retained its name Agaricus. And Agaricus is a fascinating and large genus of mushrooms, but most other gilled mushrooms got moved out of that. And over here on the left is one that was observed there in Sweden last September. Beautiful mushroom, pink gills, and closely related to your grocery store button mushroom. Personally, I like to eat these meadow mushrooms. I think they're delicious. Here on the right is a patch that grow at a rest stop on Interstate 90 going through Idaho that when I drive through there, usually once a year, I'll stop and pick them. And I make sure that the grass is not looking too fertilized because they will absorb some of that stuff. But I think they're really good cooked up with eggs. So scientific naming. So a type species refers to the species that defines the characteristic of an entire genus. So most of these really old collections, like the ones that Linnaeus described, have been lost to time or they never even existed. So sometimes an iconotype is used as the type species, where a scientific illustration serves as the primary reference for a biological species when the physical specimen has been lost. There's something called a neotype, where it's a biological type specimen selected from the same area where originally described to serve as the name-bearing type for a species when the original material has been lost. So somebody could take these INAT observations that I'm doing, go right near Småland, Sweden, where Linnaeus was from, collect the Amanita muscaria, dry it, and then put it in a herbarium or fungarium as a new or a neotype species. And so you have to go through something called the International Code of Nomenclature for Algae, Fungi, and Plants if you want to name a mushroom. But you can do it. You don't need a special title. Anybody can name a mushroom provided you follow some pretty strict guidelines. I'm not going to get into that, but just a little bit about the naming process. So in 1780, this guy came along, Pierre Bulliard, and he was a French botanist who published The Herbs of France in 1780 with 200 engraved copper plates of mushrooms. So he really started to care about mushrooms. He developed a system of printing that he took to his grave. It still remains a mystery by experts today. People just can't figure out how he did it, and it was really amazing. In 1779, he commenced a work on a book called The Poisonous Plants of France. It was seized by the police on the grounds that it was a dangerous work, which probably was. I think there were a lot of poisonings were happening back in those days, but there's been some rumors going through the grapevine that iNaturalist has had rumors of similar censorship, perhaps following recent poisonings of a death cat poisoning that happened in Australia. I don't know if you heard about this story, but this lady, Erin Patterson, invited all of her ex-in-laws over for beef Wellington for lunch, and she poisoned them all. And I think 3 of them died and 1 of them lived. And she just got found guilty and is awaiting sentencing. So people are still using mushrooms as poison today, which is pretty sketchy. So he died in a hunting accident in September of 1793. Unclear what happened. It was mushroom season, but I don't think he died from mushrooms while out there. So he said, I'll write a book about natural poison. What could possibly go wrong? Here's some of his illustrations. Here on the left, beautiful Lexinum mushrooms or scaber stalks. And these are really common in temperate regions. They like to associate with different trees, some of them very specific to their host trees. We have the birch bolete here, Lexinum scabrum. Whenever I go to Colorado or Telluride, there's the aspen boletes up there, and they look just like this. But here's an observation from his neck of the woods in France of a Lexinum, and you can see that 5 o'clock shadow, those whiskers on the stem. And then over here in Bulliard's illustration, clearly has those whiskers. Really beautiful work. So he helped to, he didn't help, he described Boletus edulis. So in 1782, so the popular edible king bolete, the cep or the penny bun, this mushroom has so many common names. My friend Daniel Winkler likes to say, if a mushroom has more than one common name, that means it's a very special mushroom. And this one is definitely no exception. It's probably my favorite mushroom to eat. And so it is the type species of the genus and section Boletus. Boletus was named a long time ago, and it's still around. It's retained its name since the start. The species complex is thought to have at least 5 different subspecies. But if you heard that talk about the crazy phylogeny of the boletes, yeah, they're probably not going to get their own names anytime soon because they can like mate with each other, and it's really crazy. But I'm not going to get into that too much. He named this one the Chalcoporus piperatus, or the peppery bolete. They're in a group of fungi that are very early offshoot in the Boletaceae. So these are like really primitive boletes, and they're parasitic on Amanita muscaria. So you can see the Amanita muscaria over there on the right, and wherever you find these Chalcoporus Nearby, you will usually find Amanita muscaria, unless they're not fruiting at that time. But for a long time, they thought they were just ectomycorrhizal growing with trees, but they actually are parasitizing the mycelium of the Amanita muscaria. So you usually find these together. You can take a little nibble off the corner of this cap, and it's pretty peppery and spicy, although it's not really suggested to eat much of them, but a little nibble and spit is always fun. And yeah, this one here on the left is an observation from France from last September of Chalciporus. And then the one on the right is me holding one from here in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington State. So they look very similar, even all the way around the world. Yeah, there you go. Trent put it in the comments, the phylogenetics to resolve the evolutionary radiation of Bolitaceae. Yeah, super interesting talk. And you can see it on the NAMA YouTube page. That's where I watched it. So he also named Colibia nuda. People might recognize this as the wood bluet. And it's a widely eaten mushroom that Bulliard originally called Agaricus nudus. And he called it that because it was often confused in France with the violet cortinarius. So this one was nude, meaning it doesn't have that cobwebby veil, and that's how it got its name, nuda. It's the nude cortinarius or whatever, even though it's not a cortinarius at all. These are interesting. They smell of frozen orange juice concentrate. I think they're a really tasty mushroom. They kind of have a little bit of a crunch to them, but when they're sauteed up, they're lovely. And here on the left are some that were growing right in my neighborhood. Beautiful, gorgeous violet mushrooms. And over here on the right is one from right in Bulliard's neighborhood in France from a couple years ago. So beautiful mushrooms. So then in 1801, this game changer came along, and you might recognize this name. So when you look at the description of a mushroom, next to that mushroom in parentheses will be, I didn't put it in here for some reason, but like here, it would say bull next to, if you look up Boletus edulis, it'll say bull, B-U-L-L, and that's short for his name. And so Persoon, P-E-R-S, you'll see that on a lot of mushrooms, because he described a lot of mushrooms. So he published his synopsis, Methodica Fungorum, in 1801, which revolutionized fungal taxonomy. So he took all of the fragments of the mycological work thus far, and he organized them into an acceptable classification based mainly on macro observation. So just what you could see with your naked eye. He moved to Paris, where he spent his later life unemployed, unmarried, poverty-stricken, and a recluse, but he still did manage to study a lot of mushrooms. His only love was mushrooms, so poor guy. But here's some of his work. He says, "This is crazy. I'm going to organize this stuff." So he was responsible for defining the genus Russula in 1796, which now contains over some 3,400 species, give or take. So huge genus. And interestingly, these on the left are our version of the shrimp Russula, or Russula olympiana, named for Olympia here in Washington. But on the right, you see a Hericium abeatus, related to the lion's mane, and then to the far right is the Ariscalpium vulgare. And these mushrooms do not look like Russula at all, but they are actually in the same order of Russulalis. So he certainly would not have known that based on macro morphology, but once DNA and even some good microscopy could determine that they are also related. So interesting if you didn't know that. He described Lycoperdon perlatum, or the puffball, the studded puffball. So the word Lycoperdon means wolf fart. Dang it. Hold on. Yeah, so when you squeeze this mushroom, this brown cloud will come out of it of spores. And he thought that looked like a wolf fart. I'm sure he was laughing when he did that. They're tasty when they're young and firm and white, but when they start to get discolored yellow or brown inside, don't eat those. So Mycena hematopus, or the bleeding bonnet, he described this one in 1799. Its original name was Agaricus hematopus, and then it was moved by Paul Coomer in 1871 into Mycena. So this one bleeds when it's cut or damaged. That blood is caused by a chemical pigment thought to it's thought to be bitter tasting to deter insects. So the red exudate or latex is a blood-like fluid that contains unique alkaloid pigments. And you can take a razor or a sharp knife and cut this mushroom and it will bleed. And you can leave it for a couple days. It'll even heal up, and then you can go back and cut it again and again if you're a real weirdo. Okay. I've done it before. So the false morel, he described this one, Gyromitra esculenta, in 1800. So this species epithet means edible. So esculenta means edible or suitable for consumption. So that's a little bit misleading because these are potentially deadly unless specially prepared through methods of detoxification. A lot of people have been poisoned by these. A lot of people have actually died. A 1971 Polish study reported at the time that the species accounted for up to 23% of mushroom fatalities each year. So Persoon also gave morels their current name, Morchella, while Linnaeus described it 48 years earlier as Phallus esculenta, which literally means edible penis. So write that down. That is crazy and hilarious. I just discovered that, and I fell back in my chair when I went, oh my gosh, what is going on here? So Gyromitra esculenta can be detoxified. People eat this around the world, especially back in the olden days in war-torn country. Not a lot of things were fruiting in the early spring. People were starving to death. And so these mushrooms are one of the first things that come out in the spring. So if you do a double boil method, and it's suggested highly to do this outside because even the gas can contain these hydrazines and get you sick. And then it can be rendered edible, much like Amanita muscaria. But I think it's a novelty and I don't think it's necessary. And it might be a little bit reckless, but hey, that's just my opinion. If you want to eat them, do your thing. But right here is an iNaturalist observation from his area in France of one that was last spring. So yeah, in a couple months here, most of the country's buried in snow, but here in the Northwest, it's been pretty mild, but we will probably start seeing these in March here in Washington. So this guy comes along in 1821, known as Elias Magnus Fries. And a lot of people have probably heard this name, Fries. And he was born in 1794 in Sweden, and he became interested in fungi at 7 years old. So he produced Systema Mycologium in 1821, which established him as the foremost mycological authority of his time at just 27 years old. He described 3,210 different species of mushrooms in his career. He made use of spore color and macromorphology to separate families of mushrooms. He had 9 children. 4 of them went on into taxonomy. 2 of them that became mycologists. And he didn't particularly believe that microscopes believe in them, and he thought that they were mostly unnecessary. So Fries created a system which included 12 tribus based on macromorphological features, and it's still in use today. So let's look at his 12 tribus. So number 1 being agaricus, most gilled mushrooms. He put pretty much all the gilled mushrooms in agaricus still. Cantharellus, meaning decurrent veins. So you can see our chanterelles, the gomphus, and craterellus and stuff. These are in Cantharellus. Marulius, meaning anastomosing veins. So these veins that kind of split and fork as they go down the mushroom. These beautiful marasm, Mielis candidus that I photographed here in Port Orchard, Washington. Anastomosing, a little bit different than intravenous. I just learned that, so look that one up. Schizophilum, or the split gills. This is an interesting wood decayer. I recently heard it called probably the most common mushroom in the entire world. These ones on the right are being shined on with UV light when I photographed them. So they have a beautiful UV reaction, and these can also infect humans and cause big problems. So whenever I photograph them after learning a lot about these schizophilum infections, I hold my breath. Daedallia, so labyrinth form gills, or the maze gills. These are some gloeophyllums that I photographed here in town. Polyporous, so round, hard pores, inseparable from each other. There's the red-belted conch. This one on the right is a mushroom-shaped mushroom I found on the end of a log. Can't make this stuff up. That was really cool. Boletus, so round, soft pores that are inseparable from each other. Some beautiful pictures of our very local Boletus edulis that grow here in Washington. Some of the best in the world, I think. Fistulina, or the beefsteak mushrooms. So these have soft round pores that are separable from each other. So if you look at that picture, there you can actually peel the pores apart from each other. I was playing with that one at the Wild Rivers Fungi Festival the last time that I saw Trent and Kristen and stuff, and Brooke and everybody down there. Hydnum, so tooth-like spines. Over here, pseudohydnum, or the cat's tongue. That's one of the fun gummy mushrooms we have here in the Northwest. And so all of these tooth-like mushrooms, he put them into that tribe. Cystotrema, or flat spines. Phlebia, irregular warts and wrinkles. Philophora, smooth surface. This is our stinking earth fan, that little tiny mushroom that barely takes up one compartment in my tiny little tackle box will stink up my whole car. It smells so bad. So he described the chanterelle as Cantharellus cibarius in 1821. The North American golden chanterelles were once called the same thing, but later DNA analysis proved them to be a complex of related but distinct species. As a result, the name Cantharellus cibarius sensu stricto is now restricted to the European species. This is a picture of one that was from September of last year in Sweden. So Psilocybe semilanceata, or the Liberty Cap mushroom, he described this one in 1838. There's a really funny account of the first medical encounter with people who had accidentally ingested these, and this father went out and picked some and fed them to his family for breakfast. I guess they ate mushroom stew for breakfast, and they were all tripping really hard as this doctor took notes. It's really fascinating. But he called it Agaricus semilanceatus, and it was moved into its own genus in 1871. In 2005, Diconica split from Psilocybe because the genus was discovered to be polyphyletic. So they just kept all of the hallucinogenic blue staining ones in Psilocybe, and the rest got moved into Diconica, which was kind of an unusual move, but they're very iconic. So Free started, Free started making, but was resistant to change. He started making slight revisions after beginning to use the microscope. That's very oddly worded. I need to fix that. So his changes were mostly within microfungi. He really liked rusts and smuts and things like that. He did eventually start splitting some of the genera out of his original all-inclusive Agaricus. And this classification dominated taxonomy of mushrooms well into the 1900s. It was kind of like, his way was the way. He said, those pesky microscopes are for punk kids. I don't know if he actually said that, but he might have. So in 1834, this guy, A.J. Korda, or August Korda, came along. He was the director of the National Museum in Prague, a self-taught lithographer, an engraver, and a mycologist. And he started to notice the thing that would lead to the modern era of mycology. And I'm using the modern era of mycology as Dr. Daniel Stuntz used it, even though I think that we've entered a new era since DNA work has came on the scene. And so, maybe pre-modern, but he started to notice, he wrote the landmark in mycology, the Icones Fungorum Hacuski Cognitorum, demonstrating the advantages of the microscope and the infinite variety of microscopic fungal structures. So he was the first one to really start looking at mushrooms in the microscope. He survived an assassination attempt for his political leanings, and he was sent to Texas to collect specimens for the museum, though he perished in a shipwreck on the return voyage in 1849, and his collection was lost. So that's sad. In 1865, this guy, Charles Horton Peck, comes on the scene. And after working 48 years, Peck left a legacy of 2,700 new species identified, over 4,000 published papers, about 36,000 specimens in herbaria. So huge amount of work. His major interest was gilled mushrooms in the Agaricacea, but he also described many species in other families. He described the Amanita ocreata, the Western destroying angel, which he recognized as distinct from other white deadly Amanita species. He was a rock climber, a Republican, a devout Christian, kind of an interesting guy. I guess he was super tough. He didn't want to mess with Peck. Yeah, somebody put it in the chat. This was named after him, Hidnellum peckii. So this beautiful bleeding tooth fungus grows in the woods behind my house. It's actually really common around here. Some photographers, this is on their basket list, if you will. Uh, and we have them pretty commonly here in the Northwest. They like the Douglas fir around here, and they get this red guttation, and you can lick them and impress your friends, and it'll put this yellow dye all over your fingers, and they'll dye fabric really beautiful blue color, and they're a little bit peppery tasting, and they're studying them for anticoagulant properties. So a fascinating mushroom that's actually about as tough as a pine cone, so not considered edible. And I did coin the term basket list, so jot that down real quick. So in 1870, the first woman mycologist came on the scene, Mary Elizabeth Banning, and she formally described 23 previously unknown species of fungi. She bought a microscope and started to amass a scientific library and a private herbarium. So she is the author of The Fungi of Maryland, an unpublished manuscript containing scientific descriptions, mycological anecdotes, and 174 watercolor paintings of fungal species. She regularly corresponded with Peck, and he was one of the only people that gave her any respect in the mycological community. A lot of people just didn't respect women back then, but Peck was a good dude. And look at her paintings. They're just so unique and so original. I would love these framed in my house, but there's a stinkhorn that she painted, another thing in the genus Phallus. And so, yeah. Rose Tercy in the house. Yep, she does a talk. I think there's a couple people that do talks about the women in mycology. And so I had to fire back with that everybody in mycology talk. But her talk was super fascinating as well. 1871, this guy comes along, Paul Kummer. I think I'm saying that right. And he was a German mycologist, a priest, and a teacher. And he split those 12 tribus into many more genera that we are familiar with, like Entoloma, Hebeloma, Pleurotus, Psilocybe. And so he says, we need more names, lots of names. 12 just isn't enough. So 1890, here's Beatrix Potter. You might recognize this name. She was an English writer, an illustrator, a naturalist, an archaeologist, an entomologist, and an amateur mycologist. She just had her hands in everything. Busy lady. And she also wrote children's books like the popular Peter Rabbit. That's how most people knew her. She was wrote off by most academics because of her sex and her amateur status. So, but through meticulous work, she had theories about spore germination. And later on, she was recognized as being correct for those. So in 1889, this guy, Victor Fayard, came along. Cannot find a picture anywhere on the interwebs of Victor Fayard, but he started to use the microscopic structures as a means of determining genera. So he started splitting up genera based on microscopic features, kind of the first person to do that. So he described almost all of the microscopic features that we use today. And he was a Swiss mycologist who published his work, all of those words right there, in 1889. And he proposed some new generic designations, which are still in use today, like Agroscoby, Foliotina, Omphallotus. So here's an Omphallotus Illyrius that was growing in Italy near where Fayard was doing his work. And this is a highly bioluminescent mushroom. As the old saying goes, you could read a newspaper in the dark next to these mushrooms. They can be so bright. They're also poisonous, not deadly, but sometimes confused with chanterelles. And we have our own versions of Omphallotus or jack-o'-lantern mushrooms here in America, but not here in the Pacific Northwest. So 1900, this guy is fascinating. And you might recognize that last name, McIlvaine. So Charles McIlvaine, or McIlvaine, I'm not sure. I've heard it pronounced both ways, but he was a Civil War veteran and he fought for the North. He used a pseudonym named Tobe Hodge for many of his writings, and he wrote a book called 1000 American Fungi, which is where he earned the nickname Old Iron Guts. So let's look at what he said. And I got so lucky a couple of years ago. I got to stay with Dr. Michael Bugh, and he has this amazing library of old books, and he has like an original printing of 1000 American Fungi. And it's like the mushroom Bible. The thing is just this massive, huge book. Really, really cool. I need to get my own copy of one. I see them for a few $100 on eBay. So, but let's look at what he wrote in his book. He said, "I'm going to eat them all. I don't care what has been said." So McIlvaine went out. He ate some sulfur tufts, Hypholoma fasciculare, known to be a pretty poisonous mushroom, one of the more poisonous GI irritants. And he said, old authors give it as bitter and poisonous. The bitter is not always present. Any there is disappears in cooking. It is not poisonous. Whoops. But one of our most valuable species. I have eaten it since 1881. A little lemon juice or sherry will cover the slightly saponaceous taste sometimes present. Only the caps are good. It makes a choice pickle and a good ketchup. So I would not follow his advice, but pretty crazy. And the slightly saponaceous taste. I mean, if you nibble and spit this mushroom, it is like sucking on an old penny. It is so bitter that I just don't see how you could get past that. But I thought that was pretty fascinating. The emetic russula. So he ate the what's called the vomiter. And he said, I began tasting this russula and soon found that it was harmless. At least 20 persons ate it in quantity during its season for 4 years. Yet in many published articles, I continued, out of regard for the opinions of others and in an excess of caution, to warn against all bitter and peppery fungi. But from that time until the present, I have eaten it, and I have made special effort to establish its innocence by getting numbers of my friends to eat it. So a dinner party at old McIlvaine's had to have been a good time. It was suggested by one of its prosecutors that perhaps I was mistaking another fungus for it. In October 1898, I sent to Professor Peck a lot of the russula I was eating. He wrote, it seems to be our emetica, as you state, it certainly is hot enough for it. So he was definitely an iron gut. So what else? Galerina marginata, the funeral bell, highly deadly mushroom containing amatoxins. Do not follow his advice on this one. Back then they called it Foliota marginatum, but in the book he says the caps of this small galerina, seldom over 1.5 inches across, can be gathered in goodly numbers where it frequents. They are of excellent quality. So yeah, don't follow that advice. And there's a reason why they're in goodly numbers, because nobody is picking those to eat them. Crazy. But I think it's fascinating. There's so many more examples of insane mushrooms that he ate and thought were delicious. I'm not that guy. 1902, George Washington Carver was our first Black mycologist. He was born to slave parents in Missouri. He had a real knack for the natural world, and he was known for developing techniques and improving depleted soil on cotton plantations. So his work, entitled New Alabama Fungi, consisted of 60 fungal collections that he described meticulously. He's actually had 2 species named after him. Here, this one, Metasphaeria carveri, is like a grass rust, and he was really into the agricultural side of things. So really cool. Also facing the things that the women had faced, not a really popular guy, but he continued to do his work despite discrimination. So in the 1940s, this guy comes along, Rolf Singer, and we're starting to get into the modern day stuff. He was a German mycologist who fled to Spain during the Nazi regime, then to France, then the US, then Argentina, Buenos Aires, and he retired in Chicago. He had already published 5 scientific papers by the time he was 16 years old, and he went on to publish over 400 different papers. He published his work, Agaricales in Modern Taxonomy, in 1962, which did what the Friesian system did in 1821. So he was the next Elias Fries. He came along and he said, okay, all of this mess, I'm going to take all of the macro and the micro features, and I'm going to put them into one cohesive text. So he was kind of the first person to take all of this stuff and put it all together in one book. And that really solidified his name as one of the great people of mycology. So here's his book, The Agaricales in Modern Taxonomy. It was the foundational model for mushroom taxonomy before DNA analysis. So based on features like spores, cell structures like basidia, and other visually observable parts of the mushroom, he described 86 new genera. He published over 2,460 specific names for fungi, mainly in Central America. He loved Central America. So here's on the right are his illustrations of microscopic features, which I just think are so cool. They're so concise and clear and clean, and just such a cool style. 1957, this guy comes along, R. Gordon Wasson, an amateur mycologist. He fell in love with mushrooms on his honeymoon with his wife, and they found edible mushrooms, and their fascination began. And I think he was a good mycologist. He was a good dude, and he loved mushrooms. And so they both began field research with a focus on ethnomycology. So what other cultures were doing with mushrooms after noting the different attitudes between Russians and Americans regarding mushrooms. So him and his wife published Mushrooms, Russia and History in 1957, which kind of put him on the map. And in studying what these other cultural uses of fungi was, he suggested that Amanita muscaria was the actual soma elixir, and he wrote Soma, the divine mushroom of immortality, pictured there. In his studies of the cultural use of fungi, he heard accounts of a mind-altering mushroom used religiously in Mexico. So him and his wife went on a journey, and they claimed to have been the first Westerners to participate in a psychedelic mushroom ritual, and came back to America, told Life magazine about it, and exposed the Western world to psilocybin-containing mushrooms after their trip. And, kind of blew the lid off of this. This is a whole story in itself. And it really kind of put a black eye on Western mycology and what he had done. He kind of exposed it, and it didn't go well after that, but that's another story. In the 1960s, this guy comes along, Alexander Smith, and he is pretty much where I'm going to leave off because, then I start getting into people who are still alive or have just recently died who have contemporaries, and it just gets complicated that way. So Alexander Smith was the curator at the University of Michigan Herbarium. He was known for being critical of others' work that he deemed inadequate. In his career, he collected over 100,000 specimens that are housed at the University of Michigan Herbarium. At least 7 mushrooms are named to honor him. So he wrote over 200 publications and books, monographs, and a popular field guide, the Mushroom Hunter's Field Guide, which sold over 100,000 copies. He is known for over-describing species sometimes. One time he published 28 different synonyms for the same Hebeloma mushroom. Now those are an informal award in his name for people who describe too many species, which are synonyms. But Smith is where I got to draw the line on this talk. There's too many current people to name, and I'm sure some people are already sore about some of the names that I've left out. And I have had conversations with people about this, and it's just tough to stuff it all into an hour talk and not leave some important people out. But there's a lot of them. So 2000s into a new age. So new molecular evidence in the form of DNA barcode interpretation began, starting a new epoch in fungal taxonomy. So the concept of DNA barcoding, pioneered by Paul Hebert for butterflies, was applied to fungi, becoming a powerful tool for identifying fungal species. The development and widespread use of DNA barcoding markers, such as the ITS region or the internal transcribed spacer region, significantly advanced fungal identification and characterization. And so that's why fungal taxonomy is once again all over the place. And you can start your own DNA lab at home for under $500. And maybe in perhaps a decade, we'll be able to simply put a small piece of tissue into a flash drive and plug it into your computer or your device and get instant DNA results. But that's at least 10 years away, is what I was told by Stephen Russell. So, the main purpose of this is to contribute to a better understanding of field mycology. A human observing mushrooms to understand their natural world is what it's all about. So you can help contribute to the understanding of fungal taxonomy by uploading your mushroom observations to iNaturalist. Like I said in the beginning, iNat offers many projects that provide free DNA sequencing. So you're literally part of helping understand fungal diversity and taxonomy in your own corner of Mushroom Wonderland. So make sure to check me out on YouTube and all the other social medias. I put out weekly videos, and I have a lot of fun mycologists come with me into the woods, and we go out and crack wise and talk about mushrooms and cook things and eat things and all of that kind of stuff. Oh, Irene Mounts. Yeah, there's so many. I know. So many. But thank you all very much for having me. And thank you, Trent and Nama and everybody involved. I can't wait to see you all down the trail.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Aaron. Much appreciated. That was thoroughly entertaining. I chuckled quite a few times throughout. I thought you left a lot of wolf fart jokes on the table, but maybe next time.
Yeah, there's still a lot. It's always changing. So if you see me at a festival somewhere and I'm giving this talk, it'll probably be a little bit different next time.
I think there were a lot of little hidden jokes in there too. I caught a couple, and a few I kind of was like, I think I missed that one.
Yeah, maybe.
Do
I
you
still
want
can't I still can't get over Linnaeus's name for the morel. It's just
to?
when I found that out, I just fell backwards in my chair. Like, are you kidding me? That's so funny.
There's a few questions in the Q&A if you want to take a look at them there and give them an answer.
Sure, there's a Q&A or in the chat or what?
No, it's in the Q&A down below.
I don't see it though. Oh,
Uh,
can I stop sharing here? Oh,
yeah,
there.
we can stop sharing. It's down there, like with all the little icons. There should be three of them available to you right now, three Q&As. I can read them to you.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Now there's four.
With DNA and protein sequencing changing mycological taxonomy so extensively, do you know what percent of fungi have been classified in this way? I wonder how many species we have yet to cover. I don't know that number, but I know it's an ongoing thing, and they've taken a lot of old specimens out of herbarium to do DNA testing on them. But it can be tricky because a lot of herbaria just won't give access to everybody to do that kind of work. So a lot of new material is being DNA sequenced, so much of it, honestly. But I think there's still a lot left to do. So do I have any books I'd recommend for field ID? Man, it's sort of a regional thing. So here in the Pacific Northwest, my go-to these days is probably Noah and Christian's Mushrooms of Cascadia, which is a really good like pictorial key. The other Mushrooms of Cascadia by Dr. Bug is a really good like dichotomous key. And so I like those. That's probably my go-to is Mushrooms of Cascadia. Your channel gives me my hiking fix in the snow months. How is Gunnar doing? And can you give him a good boy from all of us? Yes, Gunnar is doing really good. He's my YouTube famous puppy, and he's on gabapentin and carprofen and a healthy diet, and he's doing so good. But he has an aversion to me being on the computer. Some people know this. It is so weird. So if I'm here at my computer, he goes and hides in a back room. I don't know if the computer hit him when I wasn't looking, but it's so weird. But he's good. He's back there hiding somewhere. So he's excited for me to go give him a treat or something. Okay, I love on your YouTube where you have hypothetical conversation with goofballs. What's the dumbest question you've actually heard on a foray? Oh my gosh, I don't know. All questions are good questions. I don't know how to. The can I eat it thing just always goes too far. Everybody wants to know, can I eat that? It's like it's a tree conch. The thing is like as hard as wood. So I tell people right at the beginning, like when I take people out on my mushroom wonderland forays, like let's be reasonable. If it seems edible and soft and like something that could be eaten, then yes, let's ask that question. But if it's 3 millimeters tall, or if it's as hard as a pine cone, let's just use common sense here.
Or totally rotten.
Yeah, or totally rotten. Yeah, or not fungal at all. I don't know. So yeah, I hope y'all caught the part about everything's edible once. It's not. Look up the definition of edible. I see that so much online. It drives me crazy. So I love the history. Thanks. One question on recent events. Who is the low voice on your YouTube channel who says, "Welcome to Mushroom Wonderland"? That's the troll that lives on the bridge on the way into Mushroom Wonderland, didn't you know? So that's the magic of audio editing. That's yours truly. Welcome to Mushroom Wonderland. So thank you all, everybody. And and hopefully that was informative. And I just had so much fun making that presentation, and I really appreciate the opportunity, Trent. And hopefully we see you guys sooner than later. I can't hear you, Trent. I think you're on mute.
Oh, I said see you soon, probably at a NAMA event. And thanks again. Everybody's saying goodnight and thanking you there on the chat.
Cool. Thank you all. I appreciate you, and I hope to see you somewhere else. Much love.
Bye-bye.